There's a lie you've been told your entire life. A lie so seductive, so deeply embedded in the fabric of modern masculinity that you've never questioned it. The lie is this: everything you do must be exceptional. Your career, your body, your relationships, your hobbies, your thoughts. Even your failures must be spectacular, worthy of a story, something that sets you apart from the masses of ordinary men. I know, because I lived this lie for decades. I chased perfection like a man possessed, believing that excellence in all things was the only path to respect, love, and meaning. I was wrong. Over the next 16 chapters, we'll dismantle the perfectionist prison you've built around yourself. And we'll learn the ancient art of enough. Enough effort, enough progress, enough presence to transform your life without destroying yourself in the process. The fire is lit, the path is clear. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Perfection Trap. The perfect is the enemy of the good, but mediocrity is the friend of mastery. Listen carefully. You've been lied to, not by any single person, but by an entire culture that worships at the altar of optimization. Every podcast, every book, every guru selling you the dream of peak performance has whispered the same poison into your ear. If you're not exceptional, you're failing. This lie has paralyzed more potential than any enemy ever could. I know because I lived it. For years I chased perfection in every domain. My workouts had to be flawless. My diet had to be pristine. My work had to be groundbreaking. My relationships had to be Instagram-worthy. Every conversation, every decision, every moment had to be optimized for maximum impact. The result? Burnout that felt like spiritual death. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to be excellent at everything simultaneously. It's not physical fatigue, though that comes too. It's the bone-deep weariness of a mind that never rests, never accepts. Get enough. Never allows for human imperfection. You know this feeling. You felt it in the paralysis before starting a project, because it might not be perfect. You felt it in the anxiety of maintaining impossible standards. You felt it in the shame when you inevitably fall short of your own impossible expectations. The modern world has convinced us that mediocrity is the enemy, that settling for average is moral failure, that if we're not constantly improving, optimizing, maximizing, we're wasting our potential. But what if mediocrity, deliberate, conscious, strategic mediocrity, is actually the foundation of everything great? Consider the craftsman who spends decades perfecting his trade. He doesn't start by creating masterpieces. He starts by making 10,000 mediocre bowls, chairs, blades, each one slightly better than the last, but none individually remarkable. It's the accumulation of mediocre repetitions that builds the neural pathways, the muscle memory, the intuitive understanding that eventually produces mastery. The Japanese have a concept, shokunin. It refers to craftsmen who dedicate their lives to perfecting their craft. But here's what Western productivity culture misses. These masters spend most of their time doing ordinary work, making the same cut, practicing the same motion, repeating the fundamentals until they become second nature. They understand something we've forgotten. Excellence emerges from the consistent practice of ordinary actions. Think about breathing. You don't optimize each breath. You don't analyze the perfect oxygen intake ratio. You don't compete with others to see who can breathe most efficiently. You simply breathe, consistently, without thought, and this mediocre, automatic function keeps you alive. This is the first truth. Your obsession with perfection is stealing your life force. Every moment spent paralyzed by the fear of imperfection is a moment stolen from actual progress. Every project delayed because it's not ready is a project that will never teach you what you need to know. Every standard set so high that you never begin is a door that remains forever closed. I learned this lesson in the most humbling way possible. After years of ambitious fitness plans that lasted weeks, elaborate business strategies that never launched, and creative projects that died in the planning phase, I found myself exactly where I started, but older, more cynical, and carrying the weight of accumulated failures. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a Japanese maintenance worker I met in Tokyo. This man had cleaned the same subway station for 23 years. Every day, the same routine. Sweep the platforms, wipe the benches, clean the windows. Nothing spectacular, nothing Instagram-worthy, which has watched into the bridge of the fire of one Saturn. Nothing that would make anyone call him exceptional. But as I watched him work, I noticed something remarkable. Every motion was precise, without being forced. Every surface he touched became cleaner than it had been. The entire station radiated a sense of order and peace that was almost spiritual. When I asked him about his work, he said something that changed my life. I am not trying to be the best cleaner in Tokyo. I am trying to clean this station perfectly today. Tomorrow, I will try to clean it perfectly again. After 23 years, I think I am getting mediocre at this. Mediocre. This master craftsman, whose work transformed an entire space, called himself mediocre. That's when I understood. He wasn't being humble. He was being precise. He had found the sweet spot between ambition and acceptance, between striving and settling. He had discovered the art of deliberate mediocrity. And then I have a 16-17 mystical. It's not lowering your standards or accepting less from life. It's the conscious choice to focus on consistency over intensity, on showing up over standing out, on process over performance. It's the recognition that excellence is not a destination, but a byproduct of ordinary actions performed with extraordinary consistency. Here's what happens when you embrace deliberate mediocrity. The pressure disappears. When you're not trying to be perfect, you can actually begin. When you're not trying to impress anyone, you can focus on improving. When you're not afraid of being ordinary, you can do extraordinary things. The gym becomes a place of practice, not performance. You're not there to set records or post photos. You're there to move your body consistently, to honor the commitment you made to yourself, to show up regardless of how you feel. Work becomes a craft, not a competition. You're not trying to revolutionize your industry overnight. You're trying to do good work today, and tomorrow, and the day after that. You're building something worthwhile through the accumulation of ordinary efforts. Relationships become connections, not performances. You're not trying to be the perfect partner, friend, or father. You're trying to be present, honest, and consistent in your care for others. This is radical in a culture that demands optimization. This is rebellious in a world that worships peak performance. This is revolutionary in a society that has forgotten the power of simply showing up. The perfect workout plan that you never start is worthless. The mediocre workout that you do consistently for a year will transform your body and mind. The perfect business idea that remains an idea is worthless. The mediocre business that you actually build will teach you everything you need to know about success. This is your invitation to step off the hamster wheel of perpetual optimization. This is your permission to be mediocre at the things that don't matter, so you can be consistent at the things that do. The path forward is not complicated. It's simple, brutally, beautifully simple. Choose consistency over intensity. Choose showing up over standing out. Choose deliberate mediocrity over paralyzing perfection. Your future self is not waiting for you to become perfect. He's waiting for you to begin. Chapter 2. The Weight of Expectations. Quote, "The heaviest chains are forged from our own expectations." There's a particular kind of suffocation that comes from carrying expectations that were never meant to be yours. You wake up each morning with an invisible weight pressing down on your chest. It's the accumulated pressure of every standard you've accepted without question, every benchmark you've adopted without examining, every definition of success you've inherited from others. Society has programmed you to be a performing seal, jumping through hoops for applause you don't even want from people whose opinions shouldn't matter. But you've been doing it so long, you've forgotten what it feels like to move freely. The expectations come from everywhere. Your parents wanted you to be stable, so you chase security even when it feels like death. Your peers expect you to achieve certain milestones by certain ages, so you measure your worth against arbitrary timelines. Social media bombards you with highlight reels, so you judge your behind-the-scenes reality against others' carefully curated performances. But the cruelest expectations are the ones you've placed on yourself. You've decided that anything less than exceptional is failure. You've convinced yourself that if you're not constantly improving, you're falling behind. You've created internal standards so impossibly high that you live in perpetual disappointment with yourself. Let me tell you what this does to a man's soul. It empties it. When every action is measured against perfection, nothing feels good enough. When every achievement is immediately eclipsed by the next goal, nothing feels satisfying. When every day is judged by impossible standards, every day feels like failure. This is not strength. This is not ambition. This is not the mark of a man who demands excellence from himself. This is the mark of a man who has forgotten that he is human. I spent years carrying expectations that nearly broke me. In my 20s, I believed I should be building an empire while maintaining perfect health, while cultivating meaningful relationships, while pursuing creative fulfillment, while staying informed about everything, while being available to everyone. The mathematics of this equation is simple. It's impossible. But impossibility didn't stop me from trying. It didn't stop me from feeling like a failure when I couldn't do it all perfectly. It didn't stop me from pushing harder when I should have been questioning whether the game itself was worth playing. The breaking point came during what should have been a moment of triumph. I had achieved something. It's watching galley I'd worked toward for years, a professional milestone that represented everything I thought I wanted. Instead of satisfaction, I felt nothing. Worse than nothing. I felt the immediate pressure to achieve the next thing, and the next, and the next. That's when I realized I wasn't living my life. I was performing someone else's idea of what my life should look like. The expectations we carry are really our own. They're inherited, absorbed, unconsciously adopted from the scene. Sources we've never questioned. Your father's unfulfilled dreams become your obligations. Your mother's fears become your limitations. Your culture's definitions of success become your prison. But here's what nobody tells you about expectations. Most of them are completely arbitrary. The timeline that says you should be married by 30? Arbitrary. The standard that says you should love your job? Arbitrary. The belief that you should maximize every opportunity? Arbitrary. The assumption that you should always be improving? Arbitrary. These are not natural laws. They are not moral imperatives. They are social constructs that serve others more than they serve you. The pharmaceutical industry benefits when you believe you should optimize your mood. The fitness industry benefits when you believe you should optimize your body. The productivity industry benefits when you believe you should optimize your time. The self-help industry benefits when you believe you should optimize your entire existence. But what serves you? What actually makes your life worth living? This is where deliberate mediocrity becomes revolutionary. When you choose to be ordinary, you refuse to play games that were rigged against you from the start. When you embrace consistency over excellence, you free yourself from the exhausting cycle of perpetual optimization. Consider this. What if being a decent father is enough? What if being reasonably healthy is sufficient? What if doing good work, not groundbreaking work, not industry-disrupting work, but simply good work, is perfectly acceptable? This isn't about lowering your standards. This is about examining whether your standards are actually yours. The man who tries to be perfect at everything becomes master of nothing. The man who tries to exceed expectations in every domain spreads himself so thin that he disappears. The man who refuses to accept good enough in any area never experiences the peace that comes from being satisfied with his efforts. But
the struggle about and explain that is most always contribute to others. Date and here's what strategic satisfaction looks like in practice. You exercise regularly, but you don't optimize every workout. You eat well most of the time, but you don't agonize over every meal. You work diligently, but you don't sacrifice your sanity for marginally better results. You love your family, but you don't try to be the perfect husband or father every moment of every day.
this drives perfectionists insane. They cannot understand how you can be satisfied with good enough in any area. They mistake your contentment for complacency, your acceptance for defeat. But you know something they don't. Excellence in everything is excellence in nothing. Master of all trades, master of none. When you spread your perfectionist energy across every domain of life, you dilute it to the point of ineffectiveness. The counterintuitive truth is that accepting mediocrity in most areas allows you to achieve genuine excellence in the areas that truly matter to you. You have limited energy, limited attention, limited time. These are not character flaws to overcome. They are human constraints to work within wisely. The man who tries to transcend these limitations through willpower and optimization burns out. The man who accepts these limitations and works strategically within them thrives. This requires something that our achievement-obsessed culture desperately lacks: wisdom. The wisdom to know what matters and what doesn't. The wisdom to know when good enough is good enough. The wisdom to know the difference between settling and strategic satisfaction. Most men never develop this wisdom because they never give themselves permission to stop optimizing long enough to think clearly about what they actually want from life. They're too busy chasing someone else's definition of success to define success for themselves. They're too busy trying to be impressive to ask themselves who they're trying to impress and why their opinion matters. But when you embrace deliberate mediocrity, you create space for this kind of reflection. When you stop trying to be perfect at everything, you can start being intentional about anything. You begin to ask better questions. What do I actually care about? What would I pursue if no one was watching? These questions lead to answers that optimization never provides. They lead to choices based on your values rather than others' expectations. They lead to a life that feels authentic rather than performative. The weight of expectations has been crushing you, not because you're weak, but because you've been carrying weight that was never meant to be yours. It's time to set it down. The answers to these questions will surprise you. You'll discover that most of the pressure you feel is optional. Most of the standards you're killing yourself to meet are meaningless. Most of the expectations that keep you awake at night don't deserve the mental real estate you've given them. But you also discover something more important. When you stop trying to be everything to everyone, you can start being something meaningful to yourself. When you stop carrying the weight of impossible expectations, you become light enough to actually move forward. When you stop trying to be perfect, you become free to be yourself. And yourself, it turns out, is more than enough. Chapter 3. The Paradox of Effort. The harder you grip, the more sand slips through your fingers. There exists a cruel paradox in human nature. The more desperately we want something, the more likely we are to destroy our chances of getting it. You've lived this paradox. You felt it in the job interview where your need to impress made you stumble over words that usually flow freely. You've experienced it in the relationship where your fear of loss created the very distance you were trying to prevent. You've witnessed it in the creative project where your attachment to the outcome strangled the inspiration that sparked it. This is the paradox of effort. Maximum effort rarely produces maximum results. The athlete who grips the bar too tightly lifts less weight. The musician who tries too hard to hit the perfect note hits nothing but discord. The businessman who forces every opportunity finds that opportunities avoid forced men. But our culture worships effort. We celebrate the grind, glorify the hustle, and genuflect before the altar of maximum intensity. We've been programmed to believe that if we're not giving 110%, we're not giving enough. This programming is destroying us. I learned this lesson through pain, which is how most worthwhile lessons are learned. For years, I approached everything in my life with white-knuckled intensity. Every workout was a battle to be won. Every project was a mountain to be conquered. Every relationship was a performance to be perfected. The results were predictable: chronic stress, diminishing returns, and a growing sense that life was something to be endured rather than enjoyed. The breakthrough came in the most unlikely place: meditation retreat, where I was, predictably, trying to be the best meditator in the room. I was attacking mindfulness with the same aggressive energy I would brought to everything else, measuring my progress, competing with other participants, frustrated that enlightenment wasn't arriving on my preferred timeline. On the third day, the teacher pulled me aside. An old Japanese man whose presence radiated the kind of calm that comes from decades of practice. He said something that shattered my understanding of achievement. "You are trying to force the river to flow faster, but rivers know their own speed. Your job is not to make the water move, it is to remove the rocks that block its path." That night, I lay awake complimenting this metaphor. I realized that everything I'd been taught about success was backwards. I had been adding rocks to the river: stress, pressure, anxiety, attachment, and then wondering why the flow was so turbulent. What if, instead of adding more effort, I focused on removing the obstacles to effortless action? This is the essence of deliberate mediocrity. It removes the obstacles that intensity creates. When you try too hard at the gym, your form breaks down and you get injured. When you try too hard in conversation, you become awkward and push people away. When you try too hard at work, you create mistakes that wouldn't exist if you simply focused on doing the task well. But when you approach these same activities with calm consistency, something magical happens. You enter a state of relaxed concentration, where peak performance becomes effortless. The Taoist concept of Ru Wei describes this perfectly. It means effortless action. Not passive inaction, but action that flows from alignment rather than force. It's the difference between swimming against the current and swimming with it. Both require energy, but only one feels like struggle. Consider the master craftsman again. Watch him work, and you'll notice something remarkable. He doesn't appear to be trying hard. His movements are fluid, economical, precise. There's no tension in his body, no strain in his face. He looks like he's playing rather than working. This is not because the work is easy. This is because he has learned to work with the grain of reality rather than against it. He has discovered that excellence emerges from relaxation, not tension. The same principle applies to every domain of life. In fitness, the most effective workouts often feel sustainable rather than punishing. You're challenging yourself, but within a framework that your body can adapt to rather than revolt against.
In this moment, the science decides to remobilize how work can be used.
The man who exercises with desperate intensity burns out within months. The man who exercises with calm consistency transforms
His body and mind over years. In relationships, the deepest connections form not through desperate attempts to be interesting or attractive, but through genuine presence and authentic expression. The man who tries too hard to be liked reveals his insecurity. The man who is comfortable with himself draws others toward his authenticity. In creative work, the most inspired ideas come not from forcing creativity, but from creating conditions where inspiration can arise naturally. The man who attacks his craft with frantic energy produces forced, egg-size creationless, allows his unique voice to emerge. In business, the most sustainable success comes not from grinding harder than everyone else, but from finding leverage points where small, consistent actions create disproportionate results. The man who works with desperate intensity burns out before he builds anything lasting. The man who works with strategic patience builds empires. This doesn't mean being lazy or passive. This means understanding the difference between effort that creates results and effort that creates resistance. Productive effort feels energizing, even when it's challenging. It leaves you tired but satisfied, pushed but not depleted. You could continue tomorrow because you haven't exhausted your reserves today. Counterproductive effort feels draining even when you're achieving your goals. It leaves you exhausted and resentful, successful, but somehow empty. You need to recover before you can continue, because you've borrowed energy from tomorrow to fuel today. The key is learning to recognize the difference in your body, in your mind, in your emotional state. When you're working with the grain of reality, there's a sense of flow, even in difficulty. When you're working against the grain, there's a sense of friction, even in easy tasks. Deliberate mediocrity teaches you to work with the grain. When you're not trying to be perfect, you can focus on being effective. When you're not trying to impress others, you can focus on impressing yourself. When you're not trying to maximize every outcome, you can focus on optimizing your input. This creates a positive feedback loop. Sustainable effort produces better results, which increases motivation, which makes the effort more sustainable. You begin to enjoy the process rather than endure it. Compare this to the perfectionist's cycle. Max effort produces diminishing returns, which creates frustration, which demands even more effort, which produces even worse results. Eventually, he burns out completely and quits. The perfectionist and the deliberate mediocrity practitioner might start at the same place, but after a year, the perfectionist has either quit or is miserable. The mediocrity practitioner is still going, still improving, still enjoying the journey. After 5 years, there's no comparison. The perfectionist has likely cycled through multiple attempts and multiple burnouts. The mediocrity practitioner has accumulated 5 years of consistent progress and is all operating at a level the perfectionist will never reach because he can't sustain the effort required to get there. But this requires something that achievement culture has trained out of us: trust. Trust in the process. Trust in consistency. Trust that showing up matters more than standing out. Most men never develop this trust because they're too busy forcing results to notice that force is what's preventing the results they want. They grip the steering wheel so tightly that their hands cramp and their driving becomes erratic. They pursue opportunities so aggressively that opportunities begin avoiding them. They try so hard to be mad successful that they sabotage their own success. But when you learn to hold your goals lightly, to care deeply about your effort while remaining detached from specific outcomes, you create space for results to emerge naturally. This is not passive resignation. This is active patience. This is strategic non-attachment. Chapter 4. Liberation through limitation. Quote, "Freedom is not the absence of constraints, it is the mastery of them. The prison of infinite choice is the cruelest prison of all, because it masquerades as freedom." You've been told that having unlimited options is the ultimate luxury, that keeping all doors open is wisdom, that refusing to limit yourself is the mark of an ambitious man. But unlimited options have not made you more free. They've made you paralyzed. When everything is possible, nothing feels necessary. When every path is available, no path feels compelling. When all choices are equal, choice itself becomes impossible. This is the paradox of modern life. We have more options than any generation in human history, yet we're more anxious, more indecisive, and more dissatisfied than ever before. We're drowning in possibility while starving for purpose. The solution is not more options. The solution is conscious limitation. Deliberate mediocrity is, at its core, the art of strategic limitation. It's the decision to be ordinary in most areas so you can be extraordinary in a few. It's the wisdom to close some doors so you can walk fully through others. This offends everything our culture has taught us about maximizing potential. We've been programmed to believe that limitation is failure, that choosing one thing means losing everything else, that focusing narrows us into irrelevance. But the opposite is true. Limitation is liberation. Consider the master artist. He doesn't try to work in every medium, explore every style, express every possible emotion. He chooses his constraints: oil paint, perhaps, or marble, or words. And within those constraints, he discovers infinite possibility. The constraint doesn't limit his creativity, it focuses it. The boundary doesn't restrict his expression, it gives it form. The limitation doesn't diminish his art, it makes his art possible. Without constraints, creativity becomes chaos. Without boundaries, expression becomes noise. Without limitations, potential remains forever unrealized. I learned this through years of trying to be everything to everyone, including myself. I wanted to be a writer and an entrepreneur and an athlete and a philosopher and a lover and a son and a citizen and an artist. I wanted to excel in every domain, experience every possibility, maximize every opportunity. The result was not a rich, full life. The result was a scattered, unfocused existence, where I was mediocre at everything and excellent at nothing. I was living under the tyranny of potential, constantly aware of everything I wasn't doing, everywhere I wasn't going, everyone I wasn't becoming. Every choice felt like a loss, because I was measuring it against all the choices I wasn't making. The breakthrough came when I met a master carpenter who had spent 40 years working exclusively with oak, not because he couldn't work with other woods, but because he had chosen to explore the villa. Infinite possibilities within this single constraint. People think limitation is poverty, he told me, as we watched him shape a piece of oak into something beautiful. But limitation is richness. When you try to do everything, you learn nothing deeply. When you choose your constraints, you discover depths that others never see. Well, he showed me pieces he had created over the decades, each one different, each one an exploration of what was possible within his chosen boundaries. The constraint hasn't limited his creativity, it had given his creativity direction, depth, substance. That's when I understood. Freedom is not the absence of constraints. Freedom is the conscious choice of constraints that serve your deepest purposes. This is what deliberate mediocrity offers. The freedom that comes from consciously limiting your pursuit of excellence to the areas that matter most to you. Instead of trying to optimize your diet, your workout, your work, your relationships, your hobbies, your finances, your personal development, your social life, and everything else simultaneously, you choose. You decide where excellence matters and where good enough is sufficient. This decision requires courage because it means accepting that you will be ordinary in some areas. It means letting go of the fantasy that you can have it all. But it also means discovering what few people ever discover: the deep satisfaction that comes from genuine mastery in chosen areas. When you limit your pursuit of excellence to 3 or 4 domains, you can actually achieve excellence in those domains. When you accept mediocrity in secondary areas, you free up the energy, attention, and time necessary for mastery in primary areas. The man who tries to be an excellent husband, father, athlete, businessman, friend, citizen, artist, and philosopher simultaneously will be mediocre in all these roles. The man who chooses to be excellent in 3 of these roles and acceptably ordinary in the others has a chance at genuine mastery. This is not about lowering your standards. This is about raising your standards in chosen areas by lowering them in others. Consider the practical applications. You might choose to be excellent in your marriage, your profession, and your health, while accepting that your social life, your hobbies, and your home organization will be merely adequate. This limitation doesn't make you a failure. It makes you focused. You might choose to be excellent in your parenting, your creative work, and your spiritual development, while accepting that your income, your physique, and your social status will be unremarkable. This limitation doesn't make you unsuccessful. It makes you purposeful. You might choose to be excellent in your business, your friendships, and your intellectual development, while accepting that your romantic relationships, your physical fitness, and your material possessions will lead. Be satisfactory, but not exceptional. This limitation doesn't make you incomplete, it makes you intentional. The key is that these are conscious choices, not unconscious defaults. You're not being mediocre in some areas because you're lazy or because you've given up. You're being mediocre in some areas because you've consciously decided to direct your finite resources toward the areas that matter most to you. This requires something that unlimited potential thinking never develops: clarity about what actually matters to you versus what you think should matter to you. Most men never achieve this clarity because they never give themselves permission to choose. They're so afraid of missing out on something that they never fully commit to anything. They keep all options open and wonder why none of them feel compelling. But when you embrace conscious limitation, you discover something that unlimited thinking never provides: the deep satisfaction that comes from going all in on choices that align with your actual values, rather than your imagined ideals. You stop living in the anxiety of infinite possibility and start living in the peace of chosen purpose. You stop feeling guilty about what you're not doing and start feeling proud of what you are doing. You stop living in the anxiety of infinite possibility, and start living in the peace of chosen purpose. You stop feeling guilty about what you're not doing, and start feeling proud of what you are doing. You're not always wondering if you should be doing something else, because you've already decided what's worth doing. You're not constantly comparing your life to other possibilities, because you've already chosen the possibilities that matter to you. This is the liberation that comes through limitation, the freedom to fully commit to your choices, rather than constantly questioning them. The peace that comes from knowing you're investing your life in what matters most to you, rather than trying to invest it in everything equally. The prison of infinite choice keeps you paralyzed. The freedom of conscious limitation sets you in motion. The anxiety of unlimited potential keeps you scattered. The peace of chosen constraints makes you focused. This is the foundation of deliberate mediocrity. The courage to choose your limitations consciously, rather than accepting them unconsciously. The wisdom to know that having it all means having nothing deeply. The understanding that freedom comes not from avoiding constraints, but from choosing the right ones. The strongest trees grow not in open fields, where they face no resistance, but in forests, where they must compete for light. The constraint forces them to grow tall and strong. The limitation creates the excellence. Chapter 5. The Perfectionist's Wound. The perfectionism is not about high standards. It is about fear wearing the mask of excellence. Behind every perfectionist lives a wounded child who learned that love was conditional on performance. You don't remember when it started. Maybe it was the parent who only smiled when you brought home perfect grades. Maybe it was the coach who only acknowledged you when you won. Maybe it was the teacher who praised your work only when it exceeded expectations. Maybe it was simply the culture that taught you that your worth was measured by your achievements. But somewhere in your early years, a connection was forged in your developing mind. Your value as a human being depends on your ability to perform flawlessly. This wound runs deeper than most men realize. It's not just about wanting to do good work or having high standards. It's about the bone-deep fear that if you're not perfect, you're worthless. If you make mistakes, you're unlovable. If you're ordinary, you're invisible. This fear has been driving you your entire adult life, disguised as ambition. The perfectionist wound creates a particular kind of internal terrorist, one that speaks in your own voice, uses your own thoughts, and claims to be helping you succeed. This internal critic convinces you that its brutal standards are necessary for excellence, that its harsh judgments are motivational, that its constant dissatisfaction is what keeps you improving. But this is a lie. The internal critic is not helping you succeed. It's sabotaging your success by making the process of creation and growth so painful that you avoid it whenever possible. Consider what perfectionism actually does to your behavior. It makes you procrastinate, because starting means risking imperfection. It makes you abandon projects before completion, because they're not meeting impossible standards. It makes you avoid challenges because failure might reveal your inadequacy. It makes you obsess over minor details while missing major opportunities. Most destructively, it makes you mistake motion for progress. You spend hours polishing work that's already good enough, researching solutions to problems that don't exist, planning for contingencies that will never arise. You stay busy to avoid the vulnerability of putting imperfect work into the world. This is not the behavior of someone with high standards. This is the behavior of someone who is terrified of being judged and found wanting. The perfectionist wound creates what psychologists call maladaptive perfectionism, the kind that decreases performance rather than improving it. Unlike healthy striving, which focuses on growth and learning, maladaptive perfectionism focuses on avoiding failure and criticism. The healthy striver asks, "How can I improve?" The perfectionist asks, "How can I avoid being criticized?" The healthy striver sees mistakes as information. What are the terms under foul spelled out? The perfectionist sees mistakes as evidence of personal deficiency. I carried this wound for decades without recognizing it. I thought my perfectionism was a strength, evidence of my commitment to excellence, my refusal to settle for mediocrity. I wore it like a badge of honor, proudly telling people about my high standards and my attention to detail. But underneath the pride was terror. Terror that someone would discover I wasn't as competent as I appeared. Terror that my work would be judged and found lacking. Terror that if I ever stopped striving for perfection, I would reveal myself to be ordinary and therefore worthless. This terror expressed itself in countless ways. I would spend weeks perfecting presentations that only needed to be good. I would rewrite emails multiple times to achieve the perfect tone. I would abandon creative projects the moment they stopped feeling inspired. I would avoid opportunities that might reveal my limitations. The perfectionist wound had convinced me that this behavior was noble, that I was maintaining high standards in a world that had settled for mediocrity. But the truth was simpler and more painful. I was so afraid of being imperfect that I had stopped actually living. The turning point came during a period of deep burnout. I had been working on a project for months, polishing and refining it far beyond the point of diminishing returns. Later, I knew it was good enough to share, but it wasn't perfect, so I kept working. One night, exhausted and frustrated, I accidentally saved over my work and lost hours of improvements. In that moment of loss, I felt something unexpected. Relief. The imperfect version that remained was actually better, more authentic, more energetic, more human than the overpolished version I had been creating. That's when I realized my perfectionism wasn't protecting my work. It was strangling it. The pursuit of perfection had taught me to sand away all the rough edges that made my work interesting. It had trained me to remove all the quirks that made it uniquely mine. It had convinced me that anything raw, spontaneous, or imperfect was somehow inferior to something polished, controlled, and sterile. But polished, controlled, and sterile is not excellence. It's the absence of life. Real excellence has imperfections that reveal the humanity of its creator. Real excellence takes risks that sometimes fail. Real excellence is willing to be vulnerable, to be seen, to be judged, because it understands that hiding behind perfection is not protection, it's invisibility. The perfectionist wound tells you that you must be flawless to be worthy of love, attention, respect. But this is backwards. People don't connect with perfection, they connect with humanity. People don't remember flawless performances, they remember authentic ones. Each act of deliberate imperfection is an act of rebellion against the wound that taught you that love was conditional on performance. Each moment of visible humanity is proof that you are worthy of acceptance, regardless of your achievements. But healing the perfectionist wound requires more than just acting differently. It requires understanding where the wound came from and why it developed. The wound usually forms in childhood when a developing mind encounters conditional love or approval. The child learns that being good, achieving highly, or performing perfectly brings positive attention, while being ordinary, making mistakes, or failing brings withdrawal of love or approval. This creates a survival strategy. If I can just be perfect, I will be safe. If I can just achieve enough, I will be loved. If I can just avoid all mistakes, I will be accepted. This strategy might have served you as a child, but it's destroying you as an adult. Adult relationships, adult work, adult life requires vulnerability, experimentation, risk-taking, all things that perfectionism makes impossible. The adult perfectionist is still that wounded child, desperately trying to earn love through performance, not realizing that the love he's seeking can only be found through connection, and connection requires imperfection. Perfect people are not relatable. Perfect people are not trustworthy. Perfect people are not human. And humans can only connect with other humans, not with polished images of what humans think they should be. Healing the perfectionist wound begins with recognizing it for what it is. Not a strength, but a defense mechanism that has outlived its usefulness. Not high standards, but fear disguised as ambition. Not excellence, but the avoidance of vulnerability. Once you see the wound clearly, you can begin to treat it with the same compassion you would show any injured part of yourself. You can acknowledge that it developed for good reasons, to protect you when you were vulnerable. Real excellence comes from the courage to be imperfect in service of something meaningful. Real safety comes from knowing that your worth is inherent, not earned. Real aliveness comes from the willingness to be seen as you actually are, not as you think you should be. The wound that taught you to hide your humanity can be healed by the daily practice of revealing it. The fear that taught you to avoid imperfection can be overcome by the consistent choice to embrace it. You are not broken. You do not need to be fixed. You do not need to be perfect to be worthy of love, success, happiness, or fulfillment. You are already enough. You have always been enough. The perfectionist wound tried to convince you otherwise, but it was wrong. Your imperfections are not flaws to be hidden. They are proof that you are human. And being human, it turns out, is more than enough. Polished images of what humans think they should be. Healing the perfectionist wound begins with recognizing it for what it is. Not a strength, but a defense mechanism that has outlived its usefulness. Not high standards, but fear disguised as ambition. Not excellence, but the avoidance of vulnerability. Once you see the wound clearly, you can begin to treat it with the same compassion you would show any injured part of yourself. You can acknowledge that it developed for good reasons, to protect you when you were vulnerable. Real excellence comes from the courage to be imperfect in service of something meaningful. Real safety comes from knowing that your worth is inherent, not earned. Real aliveness comes from the willingness to be seen as you actually are, not as you think you should be. The wound that taught you to hide your humanity can be healed by the daily practice of revealing it. The fear that taught you to avoid imperfection can be overcome by the consistent choice to embrace it. You are not broken. You do not need to be fixed. You do not need to be perfect to be worthy of love, success, happiness, or fulfillment. You are already enough. You have always been enough. The perfectionist wound tried to convince you otherwise, but it was wrong. Your imperfections are not flaws to be hidden. They are proof that you are human. And being human, it turns out, is more than enough. Chapter 6. The Shame of Ordinary quote. In a culture that worships exceptional, choosing ordinary becomes the most radical act. There is a particular shame that comes with being ordinary in a world that celebrates only the extraordinary. You feel it when someone asks what you do, and your answer doesn't make their eyes light up with interest. You feel it when your social media posts get modest engagement, while others seem to effortlessly go viral. You feel it when you realize your life story wouldn't make an inspiring documentary or best-selling memoir. This shame has been carefully cultivated by a culture that profits from your dissatisfaction with normalcy. Every advertisement tells you that ordinary isn't enough. Every success story implies that if you're not disrupting industries or breaking records, you're wasting your potential. Every productivity guru suggests that if you're not optimizing every moment, you're failing at life. But this cultural programming has created a generation of men who are ashamed of lives that previous generations would have considered deeply successful. You have a stable job, but you feel inadequate because you're not an entrepreneur. No. You have a loving family, but you feel unsuccessful because you haven't achieved fame. You have good health, but you feel like you're failing because you're not in peak physical condition. You have meaningful friendships, but you feel isolated because you don't have a massive social media following. The goalposts of enough have been moved so far that ordinary human existence, the kind that has satisfied people for millennia, now feels like failure. This is not accidental. There are entire industries built on your dissatisfaction with ordinary life. The self-improvement industry needs you to believe you're not good enough as you are. The lifestyle industry needs you to believe your current life isn't impressive enough. The achievement industry needs you to believe that if you're not constantly ascending, you're essentially dying. But what if ordinary is not the consolation prize? What if ordinary is not what you settle for when you can't achieve extraordinary? What if ordinary is itself extraordinary? I spent years running from ordinary like it was a disease. Every choice was measured against whether it would make my life more impressive, more unusual, more story-worthy. I couldn't simply enjoy a quiet evening at home. It felt like wasted time that should be spent networking or building or achieving. I couldn't appreciate a steady job. It felt like evidence that I lacked the courage to pursue something more ambitious. The shame of ordinary drove me to make choices that looked impressive from the outside, but felt empty from the inside. I pursued opportunities not because they aligned with my values, but because they would make good stories. I maintained relationships not because they brought me joy, but because they expanded my network. I took on projects, not because they excited me, but because they would look good on my resume. I was living my life as if it were a performance for an audience I didn't even like, judging myself by standards I didn't even agree with. The breakthrough came when I met a man who radiated contentment, despite living what anyone would consider an ordinary life. He worked as a librarian, lived in a modest apartment, drove an old car, and had never traveled to exotic places or achieved anything that would impress strangers. But there was something about his presence that made accomplished people want to be around him. He listened with genuine interest. He spoke with quiet wisdom. He seemed to actually enjoy his daily routines rather than endure them while waiting for something better. When I asked him about his contentment, he said something that changed my perspective forever. I spent my 20s trying to have an extraordinary life. I spent my 30s learning that an ordinary life, lived extraordinary well, is the most extraordinary thing of all. That phrase hit me like a physical blow. An ordinary life, lived extraordinarily well. I had been so focused on making my life extraordinary that I had forgotten how to live it well. I had been so obsessed with achieving impressive outcomes that I had neglected the daily practices that create genuine satisfaction. I had been so afraid of being ordinary that I had missed the profound beauty that exists in ordinary moments. What does it mean to live an ordinary life extraordinarily well? It means approaching mundane tasks with presence and care. It means finding depth in simple pleasures. It means building relationships based on genuine connection rather than mutual utility. It means pursuing work that feels meaningful to you, regardless of how it appears to others. It means understanding that the quality of your attention matters more than the objects of your attention. That how you do anything is how you do everything. That excellence is not about what you do, achieve, but about how fully you engage with whatever you're doing. Consider the difference between these two approaches to the same ordinary activities. If you're rightists, you will find other things. Cooking dinner. The first man rushes through meal preparation while checking his phone, treating it as a necessary chore to get through quickly so he can move on to more important things. The second man approaches cooking as a form of meditation, paying attention to the colors, textures, and aromas, finding pleasure in the process of nourishing himself and others. Both men are doing the same ordinary activity, but one is living it extraordinarily well, while the other is merely enduring it. Walking to work. The first man walks while listening to a productivity podcast, trying to optimize even his commute for maximum learning and improvement. The second man walks with awareness of his surroundings, noticing the changing seasons, greeting neighbors, using the time to transition mindfully from home to work. Same activity, completely different quality of experience. Talking with his partner. The first man has conversations while mentally planning his next task, giving half his attention to the person he claims to love most. The second man gives his full presence to these tasks. Interactions. Listening not just to respond, but to understand, creating moments of genuine intimacy in ordinary exchanges. The extraordinary life is not about doing extraordinary things. It's about doing ordinary things with extraordinary presence, care, and intention. This realization freed me from the exhausting pursuit of impressive experiences and allowed me to discover the richness that was already present in my daily life. Instead of constantly seeking more stimulating experiences, I learned to find stimulation in deeper engagement with simple experiences. Instead of trying to build a life that would impress others, I focused on building a life that would satisfy me. Instead of measuring my worth by external achievements, I learned to measure it by internal alignment, how well my daily choices reflected my deepest values. This shift from seeking extraordinary experiences to living ordinary experiences extraordinarily well is what deliberate mediocrity is really about. Chapter 7. The Addiction to More. The man who always needs more will never have enough. There is a drug more addictive than any substance, more destructive than any vice, more widespread than any epidemic. It's the drug of more. More money, more success, more recognition, more experiences, more knowledge, more connections, more achievements, more everything. This addiction doesn't come with withdrawal symptoms or obvious bank signs of dependency, which makes it the most dangerous addiction of all, because you never recognize you have it. The addiction to more masquerades as ambition. It disguises itself as growth. It presents itself as the natural desire for improvement. But underneath the respectable facade, it operates exactly like any other addiction. It promises satisfaction, but delivers only the need for more. You know this addiction intimately, even if you've never named it. You feel it in the brief high of achievement, followed immediately by the crash of pain, and interest, and influence, and pride, and action. What's next? You experience it in the constant sense that your current life, no matter how good, is somehow not enough. You live it in the perpetual feeling that happiness is always one more milestone away. This addiction has been carefully cultivated by forces that profit from your dissatisfaction. Consumer culture needs you to always want more products. Career culture needs you to always want more advancement. Self-improvement culture needs you to always want more optimization. Social media culture needs you to always want more engagement, more followers, more validation. But the deeper truth is that the addiction to more is not imposed on you from outside. It's generated from within by the fundamental misunderstanding about what creates satisfaction in life. You've been taught that satisfaction comes from having or achieving enough. That once you reach a tenfold certain level of success, wealth, recognition, or experience, you'll finally feel content. That the restlessness you feel is evidence that you haven't yet achieved enough to warrant satisfaction. This is completely backwards. Satisfaction doesn't come from having enough. It comes from recognizing that you already have enough. Contentment isn't achieved by accumulating more, it's discovered by appreciating what already exists. The addiction to more keeps you focused on some imaginary future where you'll finally have accumulated enough to feel satisfied, while completely missing the abundance that already exists in your present life. I lived under the tyranny of more for decades without recognizing it as an addiction. I thought my constant desire for the next level, the next achievement, the next experience was evidence of healthy ambition. I wore my restlessness like a badge of honor, proof that I wasn't settling for mediocrity. But when I honestly examined my internal experience, I had to admit that achieving more never actually made me feel like I had enough. Each goal I reached became the baseline for the next goal. Each success became insufficient the moment it was achieved. Each level of enough immediately redefined itself as not quite enough. The problem wasn't that I wasn't achieving enough. The problem was that I had trained my brain to find satisfaction only in the pursuit, never in the achievement. I had become addicted to the chase itself, not to what I was chasing. This created a cruel paradox. The more I achieved, the less satisfied I felt. Success didn't cure my restlessness, it intensified it. Achievement didn't bring peace, it brought pressure to achieve more. I was living in a state of chronic dissatisfaction, despite having achieved things that should have made me grateful. I had more than most people in most periods of history could even imagine. Yet, I felt perpetually behind, perpetually inadequate, perpetually on the verge of some breakthrough that would finally make me feel like I had enough. The breakthrough came when I met a successful businessman who had voluntarily stepped back from expanding his already profitable company. When I asked why he wasn't pursuing the obvious opportunities for growth, he said something that shook my understanding of success. It comes from him. I spent 20 years confusing motion with progress, growth with fulfillment, more with better. I finally realized that I already had everything I actually wanted. I just couldn't see it because I was so focused on what I didn't have yet. This man had recognized something that most successful people never learn. The addiction to more doesn't disappear when you achieve more. It intensifies. The more you feed it, the stronger it becomes. The more you accumulate, the more you need to accumulate to get the same hit of satisfaction. Like any addiction, it builds tolerance. What used to satisfy you becomes insufficient. What used to feel like success becomes the new baseline. What used to be exciting becomes ordinary, requiring ever-increasing doses to produce the same emotional response. This is why people who win the lottery often report being less happy a year later than they were before winning. It's why people who achieve their dream jobs often find themselves dreaming of different jobs within months. It's why people who reach their goal weight immediately set new fitness goals instead of enjoying their achievement. The addiction to more ensures that satisfaction is always postponed, always conditional on the next achievement, always dependent on accumulating something you don't yet have. But satisfaction, real, sustainable satisfaction, works in the opposite direction. It comes not from getting more, but from wanting less. Not from achieving more, but from appreciating what you've already achieved. Not from accumulating more, but from recognizing the abundance that already exists in your life. These practices feel radical in a culture addicted to more. They feel like giving up, settling, wasting potential, but they're actually the practices that lead to genuine satisfaction. The kind that doesn't depend on external circumstances, the kind that can't be taken away by changing conditions, the kind that actually delivers what the addiction to more promises, but never provides. The addiction to more promises that you will be satisfied when you have enough. Deliberate mediocrity delivers satisfaction by showing you that you already have enough. You just need to learn how to see it. The addiction to more promises that you'll be content when you achieve your goals. Deliberate mediocrity delivers contentment by showing you that contentment is not achieved, it's chosen. The addiction to more promises that you'll be happy when you get what you want. Deliberate mediocrity delivers happiness by showing you that happiness comes from wanting what you have. This is the deepest freedom. Liberation from the need for more. Not because you've achieved enough, but because you've recognized that enough was always available. You were just too addicted to more to notice it. Chapter 8. The Courage to Disappoint. The man who tries to please everyone pleases no one, especially himself. There is no path to authentic living that doesn't require disappointing someone. You've spent your life trying to avoid this truth, constructing elaborate strategies to keep everyone happy. But tell me, to meet all expectations, to be all things to all people. But the mathematics of this approach is brutal. When you try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one, least of all yourself. The fear of disappointing others has made you a prisoner in your own life. You take jobs that drain your soul because they meet others' definitions of success. You maintain relationships that exhaust you because ending them would hurt someone's feelings. You pursue goals that don't align with your values because abandoning them would disappoint people who are invested in your achievement. You've become an actor in a play written by other people's expectations, and you can't remember the last time you made a choice based purely on what you actually wanted. This people-pleasing compulsion masquerades as kindness, consideration, or loyalty. But it's not any of these things. It's cowardice disguised as virtue. It's the fear of conflict packaged as caring. It's the inability to tolerate others' disappointment presented as selflessness. Real kindness sometimes requires disappointing people. Real consideration sometimes means prioritizing your own needs. Real loyalty sometimes means prioritizing your own needs. Real loyalty sometimes means being honest, even when honesty hurts. The path of perpetual people-pleasing is not noble. It's destructive. Destructive to you, because you lose yourself in the process of becoming what others need. Destructive to them, because they never get to interact with the real you, only with the performance you think they want to see. I learned this lesson through years of chronic exhaustion and resentment. I had developed such sophisticated radar for what others wanted from me that I could adapt my personality, opinions, and behavior to match their expectations within minutes of meeting them. To my parents, I was the responsible son who made safe choices. To my friends, I was the easygoing guy who never caused drama. To my colleagues, I was the reliable team player who never pushed back. To romantic partners, I was whatever they seemed to need at the moment. This chameleon-like ability felt like a superpower. People liked me because I never challenged them, never disagreed with them, never asked for anything that might inconvenience them. I was universally well regarded as a good guy. But I was dying inside. The energy required to constantly monitor and match others' expectations was overwhelming. I was so focused on being what others needed that I had no idea what I needed. I was so practiced at reflecting others' desires that I had lost touch with my own. Worse, the relationships I had built through people-pleasing were hollow. People liked the performance I gave them, but they didn't know me because I didn't know me. I was surrounded by connections, but starving for authentic intimacy. The breaking point came when I realized I was about to marry someone because I was afraid of disappointing her, not because I wanted to spend my life with her. I was about to make the most important decision of my life, based on avoiding conflict rather than pursuing what I actually wanted. That's when I understood the fear of disappointing others had become more powerful than my desire for my own happiness. I was willing to sacrifice my entire future to avoid one difficult conversation. This realization forced me to confront a hard truth. My people-pleasing wasn't really about caring for others. It was about avoiding the discomfort of their negative emotions. I wasn't being selfless, I was being selfish in a way that disguised itself as virtue. When you refuse to disappoint people, you're not protecting them. You're protecting yourself from having to deal with their disappointment. You're prioritizing your comfort over their growth, your peace of mind over authentic relationship. Salter. The people who can handle your authentic self are the people worth keeping in your life. The people who can only relate to your performance were never really relating to you anyway. Well, this is the courage to disappoint. The willingness to reveal who you really are, knowing that some people won't like what they see. The willingness to prioritize authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, self-respect over universal acceptance. Developing this courage doesn't mean becoming selfish or inconsiderate. It means learning to distinguish between healthy compromise and self-abandonment, between reasonable accommodation and people-pleasing compulsion. Healthy compromise feels like collaboration. You're choosing to modify your preferences to create something better for everyone involved. You maintain your sense of self while finding ways to meet others' needs. Self-abandonment feels like erasure. You're not modifying your preferences. You're pretending not to have any. You're not finding creative solutions. You're simply conforming to what others want. Reasonable accommodation feels like generosity. You're choosing to stretch yourself for people you care about, within limits that preserve your well-being and integrity. People-pleasing compulsion feels like desperation. You're not choosing to be generous. You're compelled to avoid conflict. You're not preserving relationships. You're preventing them from being real. The difference is choice. Here's what the courage to disappoint looks like in practice. You tell your parents that you're choosing a career path they don't understand or approve of. You disappoint their expectations so you can honor your own values. You tell your friends that you're not available for activities that drain you. You disappoint their assumption that you'll always say yes, so you can preserve your energy for what matters to you. You tell your boss that you won't take on additional responsibilities that would compromise your work-life balance. You disappoint their expectations so you can maintain your well-being. You tell your partner that you need space to pursue interests they don't share. You disappoint their desire for constant togetherness so you can maintain your individual identity. Each of these acts of courage feels terrifying to the people pleaser because they risk conflict, rejection, or abandonment. But they're actually acts of love. Love for yourself, and ultimately, love for others. When you have the courage to be real, you give others the opportunity to love the real you, rather than the performance you think they want. When you have the courage to disappoint, you give others the courage to disappoint. Opportunity to show you who they really are when they don't get what they expect. Some will rise to the occasion and demonstrate their capacity for accepting you as you are. Others will reveal that their affection was conditional on your compliance. But perhaps most importantly, when you develop the courage to disappoint others, you develop the ability to live with yourself. You stop being a stranger to yourself. You stop resenting others for expectations you never challenged. You stop feeling like a fraud who's always one authentic moment away from being exposed. You become someone you recognize, someone you respect, someone you actually like spending time with. This is the deepest irony of people-pleasing. In trying to make everyone else happy, you become someone who can't make anyone truly happy, including yourself. In trying to avoid disappointing anyone, you end up disappointing everyone, especially the person whose opinion should matter most. The courage to disappoint is not about becoming callous or inconsiderate. It's about becoming real. It's about offering the world something authentic rather than something artificial. It's about building relationships based on truth rather than performance. And truth, it turns out, is far more satisfying than performance for everyone involved. When you stop trying to be perfect for others, you become someone they can actually connect with. When you stop trying to meet all expectations, you become someone worth respecting. When you stop trying to live, trying to please everyone, you become someone capable of truly pleasing the people who matter. Chapter 9. The Discipline of Enough. True discipline is not doing more. It is knowing when to stop. The word discipline has been hijacked by a culture obsessed with maximization. You've been taught that discipline means pushing harder, going further, doing more. That the disciplined person is the one who never misses a workout, never breaks a diet, never skips a morning routine. That discipline is about adding complexity, structure, and intensity to every area of life. But this understanding of discipline is creating more chaos than order. It's turning life into an exhausting series of optimizations, rules, and systems that require constant maintenance and perfect execution. Real discipline, the kind that actually creates freedom and peace, is not about doing more. It's about doing less, but doing it consistently. It's not about perfect execution of complex systems. It's about sustainable execution of simple principles. The discipline of enough is the art of knowing when to stop adding and start maintaining, when to stop optimizing and start accepting, when to stop pursuing and start appreciating. This runs counter to everything our achievement-obsessed culture teaches about discipline. We celebrate the entrepreneur who works 18-hour days, the athlete who trains twice daily, the parent who fills their children's schedules with enriching activities. We mistake intensity for discipline, exhaustion for dedication, complexity for sophistication. But intensity is not sustainable. Exhaustion is not productive. Complexity is not wisdom. The most disciplined people in history were not those who did the most. They were those who did the right things consistently over long periods of time. They understood that discipline is not about maximizing effort, but about optimizing sustainability. I learned this through years of disciplinary failure. I would create elaborate morning routines that lasted weeks. Complex workout programs that I couldn't maintain. Detailed productivity systems that collapse under their own weight. I thought my failures meant I lacked discipline, so I would create even more elaborate systems to compensate. But the problem wasn't that I lacked discipline. The problem was that I misunderstood what discipline meant. I was trying to discipline myself into becoming someone I wasn't, rather than discipline myself into more unmystic systems. Being a better version of who I was using discipline as a tool of self-rejection rather than self-acceptance. I was trying to discipline my way out of being human, rather than discipline my way into being a better human. The breakthrough came when I met an elderly martial artist who had practiced the same basic forms for 40 years. His routine was simple: 20 minutes of practice every morning, focusing on fundamental movements that beginners learn in their first week. When I asked why he didn't advance to more complex techniques, he said something that changed my understanding of mastery. There is no such thing as advanced practice. There are only advanced practitioners doing basic things with extraordinary consistency. This man had discovered the discipline of enough. He had found his sustainable practice and committed to it completely, rather than constantly seeking something more challenging, more interesting, or more impressive. His discipline wasn't about doing more. It was about doing the same essential things so consistently that they became part of his identity. He didn't need motivation because the practice had become automatic. He didn't need complexity because simplicity had revealed infinite depth. This is what the discipline of enough looks like. Identifying the essential practices that actually matter, committing to them with unwavering consistency, rather than constantly adding new practices that dilute your focus. The undisciplined person tries to change everything at once and maintains nothing. The fake disciplined person creates complex systems that require perfect conditions to maintain. The truly disciplined person identifies the few practices that matter most and protects them fiercely from both neglect and excess. Consider the difference between these approaches to physical fitness. The undisciplined person exercises sporadically when motivated, constantly starting and stopping new programs, never building momentum or seeing lasting results. The fake disciplined person creates elaborate workout schedules with multiple sessions per day, complex nutrition protocols, detailed tracking systems, and optimization strategies that require constant mental energy to maintain. The truly disciplined person identifies the minimum effective dose of exercise that produces the results they want and commits to it, regardless of motivation, conditions, or competing priorities. All three people might have the same fitness goals, but only the third will achieve and maintain them. Because only the third has understood that discipline is about sustainability, not intensity. The discipline of enough applies to every area of life. In work, it means identifying the core activities that produce the most value and protecting time for them, rather than trying to optimize every aspect of your professional life. In relationships, it means focusing your emotional energy on the people who matter most, rather than trying to maintain meaningful connections with everyone in your network. In personal development, it means choosing a few practices that align with your values and sticking with them, rather than constantly experimenting with new techniques and systems. In learning, it means going deep in areas that serve your actual goals, rather than trying to acquire knowledge in every interesting subject you encounter. The discipline of enough is not about doing less because you're lazy or because you've given up. It's about doing less because you've learned that more is not always better, that sustainable is more valuable than optimal, that consistency trumps intensity. It's the discipline that emerges from wisdom rather than willpower. A discipline that works with your human nature rather than against it. The discipline that creates freedom rather than imprisonment. When you master the discipline of enough, you discover that you already have everything you need to live a disciplined life. You don't need more willpower, better systems, or perfect conditions. You just need the wisdom to focus your existing resources on what matters most, and the courage to let everything else be good enough. It's a deep action of what matters most, and that is the primer.
This is the foundation of deliberate mediocrity, not the absence of discipline, but the presence of disciplined restraint, not the inability to do more, but the wisdom to know when more becomes too much. The most disciplined thing you can do is not add another practice to your routine. It's to protect the practices you already have from the temptation to optimize them into unsustainability. True discipline is not doing more. It is knowing when to stop.
Chapter 10. The Practice of Persistence. Quote, "The river cuts through rock, not by force, but by persistence." There are two kinds of people in this world: those who mistake persistence for stubbornness, and those who mistake stubbornness for persistence. The stubborn man forces his way through obstacles, doubling down on strategies that aren't working. Refusing to adapt when circumstances change, he confuses rigidity with commitment, intensity with consistency, force with determination. The persistent man flows around obstacles, adjusts his methods while maintaining his direction, continues, moving forward even when progress is invisible. He understands that persistence is not about applying more force, it's about applying consistent pressure over time. This distinction matters because deliberate mediocrity is entirely dependent on persistence, not stubbornness. It requires the kind of gentle, sustained effort that accumulates into extraordinary results over time. But our culture has confused these two qualities, celebrating the dramatic gesture over the daily practice, the heroic effort over the humble consistency, the sprint over the marathon. We worship intensity because it's visible and exciting. We undervalue persistence because it's quiet and unremarkable. This cultural bias has created a generation of men who can work incredibly hard for short periods, but struggle to maintain ordinary effort over long periods. They can motivate themselves for weeks or months, but they cannot sustain themselves for years or decades. They mistake the ability to go all out as the ability to go the distance. They confuse their capacity for temporary intensity with their capacity for permanent change. They assume that because they can be disciplined when they're motivated, they can be disciplined when motivation fades. But motivation always fades. Enthusiasm always wanes. Inspiration always passes. What remains is your capacity for persistence, your ability to continue when continuing feels pointless, to maintain when maintaining feels boring, to show up when showing up feels insignificant. I learned the difference between stubbornness and persistence through repeated failure. For years, I approached every goal with maximum intensity, convinced that the key to success was working harder than everyone else. When I encountered obstacles, I pushed harder. When progress slowed, I increased my efforts. When results didn't match my expectations, I blamed my execution, rather than questioning my approach. This strategy worked for short-term goals that could be achieved through intense effort, but it failed completely for long-term goals that required sustained effort over months or years. I would burn out from workout programs that were too intense to maintain. I would abandon creative projects when the initial excitement wore off. I would quit learning endeavors when progress became incremental rather than dramatic. My stubbornness, my refusal to modify my approach when it wasn't working, was sabotaging my persistence. I was so committed to doing things the hard way that I never learned to do them the sustainable way. The breakthrough came when I observed how my neighbor maintained his garden. Every morning, he spent 15 minutes watering, weeding, and tending to his plants. Not dramatic work, just consistent, gentle care. Over the course of a year, this unremarkable daily practice created a garden that was more beautiful and productive than the elaborate weekend warrior efforts of other neighbors. He wasn't working harder. He was working more persistently. He wasn't applying more force. He was applying consistent pressure. He wasn't trying to be impressive. He was trying to be effective. This is the essence of the practice of persistence. Understanding that small, consistent actions compound and to extraordinary results over time, while large, consistent actions produce temporary results that quickly fade. The mathematics of persistence are simple but powerful. A 1% improvement maintained daily compounds into a 37x improvement over a year. A 10% improvement maintained weekly compounds into a 142x improvement over a year. But a 100% improvement that can only be maintained for a month produces a 2x improvement that quickly reverts to baseline when the effort becomes unsustainable. Persistence is not passive. It's not simply showing up and going through the motions. True persistence requires active engagement with the process, conscious choice to continue when continuing feels pointless, deliberate recommitment when commitment wavers. It also requires wisdom about when persistence is appropriate and when it becomes stubbornness. Persistence means continuing with a strategy that's working slowly. Stubbornness means continuing with a strategy that's not working at all. The persistent man adjusts his methods when they're not producing results, but he doesn't abandon his goals when progress is slow. The stubborn man refuses to adjust his methods even when they're clearly not working, but he abandons his goals the moment they become challenging. Learning to distinguish between these requires honest assessment of your results over time. Are you making slow but steady progress, or are you making no progress despite consistent effort? Is your approach working but requiring patience, or is it not working and requiring change? This assessment requires looking at longer time horizons than our instant gratification culture teaches us to consider. Real persistence-based change often requires measuring progress in quarters or years, rather than days or weeks. But when you develop the practice of persistence, when you learn to apply consistent pressure over time rather than intermittent force, you discover something that intensity-based approaches never provide: inevitability. When you're truly persistent, your success becomes inevitable. Not because you're guaranteed specific outcomes, but because you're guaranteed to eventually find what works through the process of consistent experimentation and adjustment. The river doesn't know exactly how it will reach the ocean, but it reaches the ocean because it never stops moving toward it. It goes around obstacles, finds new channels, adapts to changing terrain, but it never stops flowing. This is the practice of persistence, never stopping the flow of effort toward what matters to you, even when the path is unclear, even when progress is invisible, even when the effort feels insignificant. The force you apply on any given day might be unremarkable, but the cumulative effect of that force, applied consistently over time, will move mountains. Chapter 11. Systems over goals. Goals tell you where to go. Systems get you there.
Goals are seductive because they feel like progress. They give you something to aim for, something to measure against, something to achieve.
But goals, by themselves, are fantasies. They're destinations without directions, outcomes without processes, dreams without disciplines. Systems are boring because they feel like work. They don't provide the emotional high of goal setting or the satisfaction of goal achievement. They're the unsexy daily mechanics of making progress. But systems are what actually create change. This distinction matters because most men are addicted to goal setting and allergic to system building. They love the inspiration of deciding what they want, but hate the perspiration of creating the processes that would get them there. They set fitness goals, but don't build fitness systems. They set income goals, but don't build skill development systems. They set relationship goals, but don't build connection systems. Then they wonder why their goals remain fantasies rather than becoming realities. The problem is not that their goals aren't worthy or specific or challenging enough. The problem is that goals without systems are just wishes. And wishes, no matter how heartfelt, don't create change. I spent years as a goal-setting addict. I would get high off the process of deciding what I wanted to achieve, writing it down, visualizing the outcome, imagining how it would feel to succeed. This goal-setting ritual made me feel productive and motivated. But motivation fades. The high of goal-setting wears off, and when it does, you're left with the gap between where you are and where you want to be, with no reliable process for closing that gap. I would set ambitious fitness goals, and then rely on motivation to get me to the gym. I would set learning goals, and then rely on inspiration to get me to study. I would set creative goals, and then rely on enthusiasm to get me to produce. This approach worked for days or weeks, as long as the initial motivation lasted. But when motivation inevitably faded, I had no system to maintain progress. I had goals, but no process, outcomes, but no inputs, destinations, but no transportation. The breakthrough came when I shifted from asking, "What do I want to achieve?" to asking, "What kind of person achieves this kind of result, and what systems do they have in place?" Instead of setting a goal to lose weight, I asked, "What kind of person maintains a healthy weight, and what systems do they use?" The answer was, they have systems for regular exercise and mindful eating. So I built those systems. Instead of setting a goal to write a book, I asked, what kind of person completes books, and what systems do they use? The answer was, they have systems for writing regularly, regardless of inspiration. So I built that system. Instead of setting a goal to improve relationships, I asked, what kind of person has strong relationships, and what systems do they use? The answer was, they have systems for regular, meaningful connection. So I built those systems. This shift from goals to systems changed everything, because systems are within your control, while outcomes are not. You can't control whether you lose exactly 20 pounds, but you can control whether you exercise and eat mindfully every day. You can't control whether your book becomes successful, but you can control whether you write consistently. You can't control how others respond to your relationship efforts, but you can control whether you consistently make those efforts. When you focus on systems, you win every day that you execute the system, regardless of whether you're seeing the results you want yet. When you focus on goals, you only win when you achieve the specific outcome, which might take months or years. This creates completely different psychological dynamics. Goal-focused people are constantly frustrated because they're constantly falling short of their desired outcomes. If you want your bank to be selling them, you can tell them what color they saw. System-focused people are constantly satisfied because they're constantly succeeding at their chosen processes. Goal-focused people quit when progress is slow because slow progress feels like failure. System-focused people persist when progress is slow because executing the system feels like success. Goal-focused people get derailed by setbacks because setbacks represent distance from their goals. System-focused people recover quickly from setbacks because setbacks are just temporary interruptions to their systems. But building effective systems requires understanding what makes systems work versus what makes them fail. Effective systems are simple enough to execute when you're tired, stressed, or unmotivated. If your system only works when conditions are perfect, it's not a system, it's a wish. Specific enough to eliminate decision fatigue. You know exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. There's no ambiguity that could create hesitation or excuses. Flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances. Life happens. Travel disrupts routines. Emergencies arise. Your system needs to bend without breaking. Measurable enough to track execution. You can clearly identify whether you executed the system or not. There's no gray area that allows for self-deception. Goals create temporary behavior change that reverts when the goal is achieved or abandoned. Systems create identity change that becomes self-reinforcing over time. The man focused on goals asks, "What do I need to do to achieve this outcome?" The man focused on systems asks, "What kind of person do I need to become, and what systems would that person have?" This shift from doing to being, from achieving to becoming, from goals to systems, is what makes deliberate mediocrity so powerful. You're not trying to achieve impressive outcomes through heroic efforts. You're trying to become the kind of person who naturally produces good outcomes through sustainable systems. You don't need to be extraordinary to have extraordinary systems. You just need to be consistent. You don't need to have perfect execution to get excellent results. You just need sustainable execution. The goal-focused person is always starting over because each goal requires a new burst of motivation. The system-focused person is always building because each day of execution strengthens the identity and improves the system. Goals tell you where you want to go, but systems are what actually get you there. And more importantly, systems are what keep you there once you arrive. The destination matters, but the journey is what changes you. And it's who you become the journey, through your systems, that determines whether you can sustain whatever you achieve. Chapter 12. The Art of Enough. Mastery is not about perfection. It is about knowing when good is good and sweet. Beige. When a prayer is loud and strong, words override in sounds, all play. In the ancient land of Aloria, mastery is not about knowing when good is loud and play. But at this point, the dragons came to come. There comes a moment in every pursuit when you must choose between the satisfaction of completion and the temptation of perfection. This moment reveals whether you understand the art of enough or remain trapped in the prison of more. The art of enough is not about lowering your standards. It's about understanding that perfectionism beyond a certain point becomes the enemy of progress, satisfaction, and sanity. It's about recognizing when additional effort will produce diminishing returns that don't justify the cost. But our culture has taught us to fear enough. We've been programmed to believe that settling for good enough is a character flaw, a sign of mediocrity, evidence that we lack the commitment to excellence that separates winners from losers. This programming has created a generation of men who cannot complete anything because nothing ever happens, feels complete enough. They endlessly revise projects that are already good. They continue optimizing systems that are already working. They keep pursuing improvements that provide marginal benefits at massive costs. They mistake their inability to stop for dedication. They confuse their resistance to enough for high standards. They think their perpetual dissatisfaction is what drives excellence. But the opposite is true. Their inability to recognize enough is what prevents them from achieving excel. I learned this lesson through years of never finishing anything to my own satisfaction. I would write articles that were already good enough to publish, but spend weeks polishing them into something that was marginally better, but significantly delayed. I would prepare presentations that were already effective. I'd continue refining them until I was over-prepared and under-energized. I would work on business strategies that were already solid, but keep tweaking them until I had analyzed myself into paralysis. I would plan projects that were already well-conceived, but continue planning until the opportunity for execution had passed. This behavior masqueraded as perfectionism, but it was actually procrastination disguised as preparation. I was using the pursuit of perfection as an excuse to avoid the vulnerability of putting imperfect work into the world. The breakthrough came when I observed a master craftsman finishing a piece of furniture. The piece was odd, beautiful, functional, well-made, but I could see small imperfections that could have been corrected with additional work. When I asked why he wasn't fixing these minor flaws, he said something that changed my understanding of mastery. Every piece teaches me something. If I spend too long trying to make this piece perfect, I lose the opportunity to learn from the next piece. Perfection is not the goal. Progress is the goal. The perfectionist's output is small because he spends too much time on each piece. The enough practitioner's output is large because he completes more pieces, each one better than the last, due to accumulated experience. Over time, the perfectionist who produces one perfect piece per year is outperformed by the enough practitioner who produces 12 good pieces per year, with piece 12 being better than the perfectionist's single piece due to the learning from pieces 1 through 11. But recognizing enough requires developing judgment about when additional effort is productive versus when it becomes counterproductive. This judgment that cannot be learned from rules or formulas. It must be developed through experience and honest self-assessment. Productive effort feels energizing, even when it's challenging. You can sense that the time and energy invested are producing meaningful improvements. You feel engaged with the process and satisfied with the progress. Counterproductive effort feels draining even when you're making technical improvements. You sense that you're experiencing diminishing returns, that the improvements you're making are not proportional to the energy you're investing. You feel obsessive about details that don't significantly impact the overall quality or effectiveness. For most men, this means being perfectionist about perhaps 3 to 5 things at any given time, the areas where excellence truly matters for your goals, values, or identity, while being deliberately mediocre about everything else. You might be perfectionist about your core work product, your physical health, and your relationship with your spouse, while accepting good enough for your social media presence, your hobby pursuits, and your home organization. The art of enough also teaches you that your work's value is not determined by its perfection, but by its utility. Work that is 80% perfect, but completed and shared, will almost always provide more value than work that is 95% perfect, but never finished. The world doesn't need your perfect work, it needs your completed work. Your perfect work that no one sees provides no value to anyone. Your good enough work that others can use, learn from, or build upon provides value to everyone, including you. This is why deliberate mediocrity is so liberating. It gives you permission to complete things at the good enough level. Chapter 13. The Identity Shift. You do not become what you want, you become what you consistently do. Identity is not what you think about yourself. Identity is not what others think about you. Identity is not your aspirations, your values, or your intentions. Identity is the story your actions tell about who you are. Every action you take is a vote for the kind of person you believe yourself to be. Every choice you make is evidence of your identity. Every habit you maintain is proof of who you have become. This understanding changes everything about personal transformation, because it reveals that you don't change your life by changing your goals. You change your life by changing your identity. And you change your identity not through declaration or affirmation, but through action. The man who wants to be fit but doesn't exercise consistently has an identity misalignment. His actions vote for someone who is sedentary, regardless of his intentions or aspirations. His identity, as proven by his behavior, is someone who doesn't exercise. The man who wants to be a writer but doesn't write consistently has an identity misalignment. His actions vote for someone who thinks about writing but doesn't do it. His identity, as proven by his behavior, is someone who wants to be a writer but isn't one. The man who wants to be a good father but doesn't consistently engage with his children has an identity misalignment. His actions vote for someone who prioritizes other things over parenting. His identity, as proven by his behavior, is someone who cares about his children but doesn't show it through consistent action. These identity misalignments create internal tension, self-criticalism, and chronic dissatisfaction. You know who you want to be, but your actions prove you're someone else. You judge yourself by your intentions, while the world judges you by your actions. But when you embrace deliberate mediocrity, you discover something profound. Small, consistent actions can create massive identity shifts over time. You don't need to transform your entire life overnight. You just need to start taking actions that align with the identity you want to develop. The man who exercises for 10 minutes daily develops the identity of jump. Someone who exercises. The frequency and intensity matter less than the consistency. The identity is built through repetition, not through impressive individual performances. The man who writes for 15 minutes daily develops the identity of a writer. The quality of the daily writing matters less than the daily act of writing. The identity is built through consistency, not through occasional brilliance. Well, asked, what? The man who engages meaningfully with his children for 20 minutes daily develops the identity of secret, an involved father. The elaborateness of the activities matters less than the consistency of the attention. You don't start exercising because you're someone who exercises. You become someone who exercises by starting to exercise. You don't start writing because you're a writer. You become a writer by starting to write. You don't start being a good father because you have that identity. You develop that identity by starting to act like a good father. The deliberate mediocrity approach makes this identity development process more manageable because it removes the pressure to perform at a high level while you're developing the identity. You can focus on consistency rather than quality, on showing up rather than standing out, on building the identity rather than impressing others. The man trying to develop a fitness identity through perfect workouts will likely quit when his workouts aren't perfect. The man developing a fitness identity through consistent, mediocre exercise will maintain the habit because the standard is achievable and the identity building continues regardless of performance quality. This is why the identity shift is so powerful. It changes not just what you do, but who you are. And when who you are changes, what you do changes naturally and sustainably. The transformed life doesn't come from forcing yourself to act differently through willpower and discipline. It comes from becoming the kind of person who naturally acts in alignment with your values, goals, and aspirations. When your identity aligns with your intentions, right action becomes effortless. When your actions align with your identity, change becomes sustainable. When your identity and actions are in harmony, transformation becomes inevitable. You are not stuck being who you've always been, but you won't become who you want to be through grand gestures or perfect execution. You'll become who you want to be through small, consistent actions that gradually build evidence for a new identity. Every action is a vote. Every day, you're voting for the kind of person you believe yourself to be. The question is not whether you're voting. You're always voting. The question is, what kind of person are you voting for? The beautiful truth is that you can start voting for a different identity at any moment, with any action, regardless of how you voted in the past. Your identity is not fixed. It's fluid, constantly being created and reinforced by your choices. The person you want to become is not some distant future version of yourself. That person exists right now, waiting to be brought to life through consistent actions that align with their identity. You don't have to become them overnight. You just have to start acting like them today, and tomorrow, and the day after that. Eventually, the acting becomes being. The aspiration becomes identity. The person you wanted to become becomes the person you are. Chapter 14. Sustainable Excellence. Excellence is not a destination, it is a way of traveling. The pursuit of peak performance has created a generation of men who burn bright and burn out. They achieve impressive results for short periods, then crash into exhaustion, cynicism, or complete abandonment of their pursuits. They mistake intensity for sustainability, sprint tactics for marathon strategy, exceptional moments for sustainable practice. They optimize for maximum output rather than optimal longevity, creating lives that look impressive from the outside, but feel unsustainable from the inside. But true excellence, the kind that lasts, the kind that compounds, the kind that creates lasting impact, is not about peak performance. It's about sustainable performance. It's not about how high you can climb, but about how long you can keep climbing. Sustainable excellence is built on a completely different foundation than peak performance. Where peak performance prioritizes maximum output, sustainable excellence prioritizes consistent output. Where peak performance accepts burnout as an inevitable cost, sustainable excellence treats burnout as a design flaw to be prevented. This distinction matters because most of what we admire in others, their careers, their relationships, their contributions to the world, is the result of sustainable excellence rather than peak performance. It's the artist's great die, accumulation of consistent effort over years or decades, not the result of BSB. The master craftsman's reputation is built on decades of reliable, excellent work, not on a few perfect pieces created through unsustainable effort. The successful entrepreneur's business is built on years of consistent execution, not on a few brilliant insights achieved through workaholism. The strong marriage is built on decades of daily care and attention, not on a few romantic gestures created through temporary intensity. Yet our culture celebrates the dramatic, the extreme, the unsustainable. We celebrate the entrepreneur who works 18-hour days while ignoring the one who works sustainable hours but has been building for 20 years. We celebrate the athlete who trains through injury while ignoring the one who trains intelligently and has a longer career. We celebrate the parent who sacrifices everything for their children, while ignoring the one who maintains the balance and models healthy living. This cultural bias toward intensity over sustainability has practical consequences. It teaches men to structure their lives in ways that guarantee eventual failure. They create systems that require perfect conditions to maintain, standards that require superhuman effort to meet, practices that depend on unlimited motivation to sustain. I learned the difference between peak performance and sustainable excellence through repeated cycles of achievement and burnout. I would identify something I wanted to accomplish, research the most aggressive approach possible, investing in relationships consistently through small, regular gestures rather than sporadic, grand gestures. The shift to sustainable excellence often feels like slowing down, but it's actually a form of speeding up. By maintaining a pace you can sustain indefinitely, you avoid the stop-start cycles that characterize most people's efforts. You make steady progress while others are alternating between sprinting and recovering. Over time, this creates a massive advantage. While others are cycling through motivation and burnout, you're consistently moving forward. While others are starting over repeatedly, you're building on previous progress. While others are trying to find the energy to begin again, you never stopped. But perhaps most importantly, sustainable excellence creates a different relationship with your pursuits. Instead of seeing them as mountains to be conquered, you see them as practices to be maintained. Instead of approaching them with grim determination, you approach them with patient persistence. This changes how you feel about your efforts. Excellence. Peak performance approaches often create a love-hate relationship with your pursuits. You love the results, but hate the process. Sustainable excellence creates a love-love relationship. You love both the process and the results, because the process is designed to be enjoyable and sustainable. When you optimize for sustainable excellence, you discover something that peak performance never provides: the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you can maintain your current level of effort indefinitely. You're not constantly on the verge of burnout, always wondering how long you can keep going. You've found a pace that works not just for now, but for the long term. This creates a different kind of confidence, not the brittle confidence that comes from pushing yourself beyond your limits, but the solid confidence that comes from knowing your limits and working skillfully within them. Sustainable excellence is not about accepting less from yourself. It's about demanding more, not more intensity, but more wisdom. Not more sacrifice, but more strategy. Not more effort, but more sustainability. The pursuit of peak performance asks, how much can I give before I break? The pursuit of sustainable excellence asks, how can I give consistently without breaking? The first question leads to impressive but temporary results. The second question leads to extraordinary and lasting results. Excellence is not about how intensely you can work for short periods. Excellence is about how well you can work for long periods. It's not about the height of your peaks. It's about the sustainability of your progress. And sustainable progress, accumulated over time, creates results that no amount of peak performance can match. Chapter 15. The Ripple Effect. Your ordinary actions create extraordinary impacts in ways you may never see. The greatest tragedy of perfectionism is not what it does to you. It's what it prevents you from doing for others. While you're paralyzed by the need to have perfect impact, others remain unhelped. While you're waiting to be qualified enough to contribute, problems go unsolved. While you're polishing your message until it's flawless, people who need to hear it remain in darkness. You've been taught that helping others requires expertise, that making a difference requires exceptional abilities, that your contribution must be unique and profound to be worthwhile. But this is a lie that keeps good people from doing good work. The truth is simpler and more liberating. Your ordinary actions, performed consistently with genuine care, create impacts you can't imagine and may never see. The ripple effect of authentic mediocrity often exceeds the impact of performative excellence. This understanding changes everything about how you approach contribution, influence, and service. You stop waiting to be perfect and start showing up as you are. You stop trying to change the world and start changing your corner of it. You stop pursuing grand impact and start creating consistent impact. The ripple effect works through ordinary interactions, everyday kindness, and simple consistency. You don't need to write best-selling books to influence someone's thinking. A thoughtful conversation might reshape their entire perspective. You don't need to build a massive platform to make a difference. But mentoring one person might change the trajectory of their life and everyone they subsequently influence. You don't need to solve world hunger to matter. Preparing a good meal for your family creates ripples of love, care, and stability that affect how your children treat their future families. You don't need to cure diseases to heal. Listening with genuine presence to someone who's struggling might provide exactly the support they need to keep going. I spent years paralyzed by the belief that my contribution had to be exceptional to be worthwhile. I wouldn't share ideas unless they were revolutionary. I wouldn't offer help unless I was uniquely qualified. I wouldn't start projects unless they had the potential for massive impact. This perfectionist approach to contribution produced nothing. While I was waiting to be qualified, but enough, smart enough, or original enough to make a difference, I made no difference at all. My pursuit of exceptional impact prevented me from having ordinary impact, which prevented me from having any impact. The breakthrough came when I shifted from asking, "How can I change the world?" to asking, "How can I be helpful today?" From, "What unique contribution can I make?" to, "What ordinary contribution can I make consistently?" This shift opened up countless opportunities for impact that my perfectionism had blinded me to. I could share ideas that were helpful, even if they weren't original. I could offer support, even if I wasn't the most qualified person available. I could contribute to solutions, even if I couldn't solve problems completely. More importantly, I discovered that ordinary contributions often have extraordinary effects because they're needed, accessible, and sustainable. The world doesn't lack revolutionary ideas. It lacks people who will consistently apply ordinary ideas with care and persistence. The father who shows up consistently for his children may never be famous, but his steady presence creates ripples of security and love that affect how his children show up for their children, creating multi-generational impacts from ordinary daily actions. The teacher who cares genuinely about her students may never be recognized for excellence, but her authentic investment in their growth creates ripples of confidence and curiosity that influence how they approach learning for the rest of their lives. The neighbor who maintains his property well and treats others with respect may never be celebrated, but his example creates ripples of community pride and social cohesion that make the entire neighborhood a better place to live. These ordinary actions create extraordinary ripple effects because they're sustainable and authentic. The world has enough performers. What it needs is more people who are willing to be ordinary in extraordinary ways. People who do good work without needing recognition. People who show up consistently without needing perfect conditions. People who contribute authentically without needing to be the most qualified person in the room. Your ordinary actions matter more than you know. Your consistent presence creates ripples you'll never see. Your choice to be genuinely human rather than artificially perfect influences others in ways that exceptional performance never could. The ripple effect means that embracing deliberate mediocrity is not just about your own liberation. It's about liberating others from the tyranny of perfectionism, the exhaustion of optimization, and the poverty of never being enough. When you show up consistently as yourself, you don't just change your own life. You change the lives of everyone who experiences your authentic presence. You create ripples of sanity, sustainability, and satisfaction that spread far beyond your ability to see or measure. And those ripples, accumulated across time and relationships, create the kind of impact that no amount of perfectionist performance could ever achieve. Chapter 16. The Long Game. The man who masters the art of patience masters the art of life. In a world obsessed with quick results, overnight success, and instant gratification, choosing to play the long game has become a radical act. You've been programmed to want everything now, to measure progress in weeks rather than years, to expect linear advancement rather than cyclical growth, to judge your efforts by immediate results rather than compound effects. This short-term thinking has created a generation of men who start strong but quit early, who burn bright but burn out, who achieve initial success but cannot sustain it. They play the sprint game in a marathon world, optimizing for immediate results at the expense of long-term outcomes. But the most meaningful achievements in life, lasting relationships, genuine expertise, lasting impact, deep satisfaction, emerge from playing the long game. They require thinking in decades rather than quarters, optimizing for sustainability rather than speed, choosing compound growth over dramatic breakthroughs. The long game is not about delayed gratification. It's about different gratification. It's about finding satisfaction in the process rather than only in outcomes, in progress rather than only in achievement, in growth rather than only in goals. This shift in perspective changes how you approach everything. Instead of asking, "How quickly can I achieve this?" you ask, "How can I achieve this sustainably?" Instead of asking, "What's the fastest path to success?" you ask, "What's the most reliable path to success?" The long game requires a fundamental reorientation of your relationship with time. You stop seeing time as a resource to be maximized and start seeing it as an ally to be partnered with. You stop trying to compress timelines and start trusting in the power of consistent effort accumulated over extended periods. I learned the power of the long game through observing two approaches to learning guitar. The first person practiced intensively for several hours daily, trying to progress as quickly as possible. He made rapid initial progress, learning songs and techniques at an impressive pace. But within 6 months, he had burned out from the intensity and stopped playing entirely. The second person practiced for 20 minutes daily, making much slower initial progress. After 6 months, his skills were far below the first person's peak level. But he continued consistently, enjoying the daily practice rather than enduring it. After 2 years, he was a competent player. After 5 years, he was accomplished. After 10 years, he was masterful. The first person optimized for speed, and the second person optimized for sustainability, but unsustainable progress. The second person optimized for sustainability and achieved slow but compound progress. Even comparable, the second person became a musician, while the first person became someone who used to play guitar. This pattern repeats across every domain of life. The entrepreneur who tries to build a business quickly through unsustainable effort often creates initial success that collapses when they burn out. The breadth of the basement entrepreneur who builds slowly through sustainable systems creates lasting success that compounds over time. The person who tries to transform their health quickly through extreme measures often achieves dramatic but temporary results. The person who improves their health gradually through sustainable practices creates lasting transformation that becomes easier to maintain over time. The person who tries to master a skill quickly through intensive study often achieves rapid but shallow learning that doesn't transfer or endure. The person who learns gradually through consistent practice develops deep, transferable mastery that continues growing throughout their life. But playing the long game requires developing several capabilities that short-term thinking has atrophied. Patience with invisible progress. Most meaningful change happens below the level of visibility, for extended periods, before becoming apparent. The long game player trusts that consistent effort is creating compound effects, even when results aren't immediately visible. Satisfaction from process rather than only outcomes, because outcomes in the long game are delayed. When you play the long game, you don't just achieve your goals. You become someone worthy of achieving them. You don't just get what you want. You become someone who can sustain and appreciate what you get. And that transformation, from someone who wants to achieve to someone who can achieve sustainably, is the real victory. Not the outcome, but the identity. Not what you get, but who you become in the process of getting it. The long game is calling you, not to be perfect, but to be persistent. Not to be exceptional, but to be consistent. Not to burn bright, but to burn long. The question is not whether you're capable of playing it. You are. The question is whether you're willing to choose it, to trade the excitement of intensity for the satisfaction of sustainability, the drama of sprints for the strength of endurance, the high of peak performance for the peace of sustained excellence. The choice is yours. But remember, the long game is not just about what you'll achieve. It's about who you'll become while achieving it. And who you become through the long game is someone who can handle whatever they achieve and keep building from there. The long game awaits. Are you ready to begin? You have reached the end of this book. But if you understand its message, you know this is actually the beginning of a different kind of life, one measured not by peak moments, but by sustainable practices, not by exceptional outcomes, but by consistent efforts, not by how much you can do, but by how well you can maintain what matters most. The path forward is not complicated. Choose consistency over intensity. Choose showing up over standing out. Choose good enough over perfect. Choose sustainable over optimal. Choose the long game over quick wins. The world doesn't need another perfect person. It needs you, flawed, human, ordinary you, showing up. Consistently, contributing, authentically, building something worthwhile through the accumulated power of small, daily actions. Welcome to the beginning of the rest of your life. It starts now, with whatever small, ordinary, deliberately mediocre action you take next. And that action, accumulated over time, will become the foundation of everything extraordinary you'll ever create. Hit subscribe to Darkwood Audiobooks if you want to be the man you want.